What if every thought in your head wasn't really yours? What if you could be rewired, not with wires or machines, but with chemicals, sleep deprivation, and silence? Not in a dystopian novel, not in a thriller, but in real life. Done not by enemies, but by the very people sworn to protect you. This was MKUltra. The MKUltra conspiracy isn't just late-night horror fuel. It's not a footnote in Cold War paranoia. It's a documented operation by the CIA, once so secretive, so ethically nightmarish, that when it was exposed, the agency tried to burn the evidence, literally. But some of it survived, enough to confirm the unthinkable. The government, under the guise of national security, experimented on its own people, sometimes with their consent, often without it, using LSD, hypnosis, electroshock, isolation, and extreme psychological pressure to break the human mind, to deconstruct identity and see what, if anything, was left. Could you erase a person and rebuild them from scratch? Could you turn a pacifist into a killer? Could you fracture a personality until it splinters into obedience? These weren't abstract questions. They were experiments. And the lab rats, prisoners, soldiers, mental patients, immigrants, children, even average citizens, many of whom never knew what was being done to them until it was too late. Some never came back. Others came back different. According to declassified records, MKUltra spanned 149 known sub-projects, some outsourced to elite universities, hospitals, and pharmaceutical companies. It ran from 1953 to 1973, hidden in the shadows of Cold War paranoia. But the real terror wasn't in its breadth. It was in its intent. This wasn't science, it was psychological warfare, a project born out of fear, but executed without mercy. We are not concerned with the ethics involved, one CIA memo coldly noted. The human subjects of these tests will be expendable. Let that settle for a moment. Expendable. That's how they viewed the people they broke. Tonight, we will peel back MKUltra dark history. You will meet the shattered lives it left behind. From Frank Olson, the scientist who got too close to the truth, then fell out of a window, to alleged sleeper agents like Sirhan or Ted Kaczynski, whose violent acts sparked whispers of CIA programming. We'll also look at orphans, housewives, and students pulled into the abyss for the sake of national security. We ask a question that still haunts intelligence agencies, historians, and survivors alike. How far can you push a human mind before it shatters? And more importantly, who decides how far is too far? If this makes you question everything you thought you knew about history, psychology, and the people in power, consider subscribing. We go deep into the truths they tried to bury. And at the end, we will answer the most intriguing question. Did it really end? Or did the tools just evolve? Let us begin. The children of silence, programming Innocence. They were supposed to be safe in orphanages, in psychiatric hospitals, in church-run shelters. But in the shadow of Project MKUltra, innocence didn't matter. Vulnerability wasn't a shield, it was the method. According to witness accounts and scattered documents, MKUltra experiments didn't just target prisoners and adults. They also involved children, some as young as 5. Not just one child, not one case. Entire programs allegedly devoted to testing how early the mind could be broken and reassembled. They called it psychic driving. Others called it brainwashing. Here's what it looked like. A child is brought into a hospital room. Electrodes attached to the skin. Lights dimmed. A looped audio message plays for hours, sometimes days. You are nobody. You will forget. Over and over again. sometimes combined with sleep deprivation, sometimes combined with injections of LSD, sometimes followed by total isolation. Why? Because they wanted to know how deeply you could program a person. Could trauma be used as a tool? Could memories be stripped away like old wallpaper? Could the mind of a child be turned into a clean slate and rewritten? There's no official acknowledgement of this, no direct confession, but survivor testimony tells a harrowing story. One woman, speaking decades later, said she grew up believing her name was Zero. That's what they called her in the clinic. She remembers the voices on tape, the needles, the feeling of floating and falling at the same time. She was told it was a hospital, but she was never sick. Researchers have connected some of these accounts to sub-projects within MKUltra dark history, including work funded through McGill University in Montreal. There, under CIA contract, psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron ran experiments on unwitting patients, some of them minors, using high-dose drugs, induced comas, and recorded messaging intended to reshape identity. What he called therapy, others now call torture. And that's the problem. What was MKUltra really? A psychological defense program, a Cold War necessity, or something else entirely? A bureaucratically sanctioned descent into madness, where no age was too young, no soul too sacred. There is no full list of victims, no government registry of the damaged. Most never even knew they were part of anything. Some only found out when documents were released years later, redacted into oblivion. But the trauma didn't disappear. It seeped into families, into generations. And in some cases, it vanished entirely, as if it were designed to. This isn't just about ethics. It's about memory. Who controls it? Who owns it? And who has the power to erase it? Before we move on, ask yourself this. If children were truly used in MKUltra experiments, what does that say about the people who ran them? And what else might still be buried, sealed behind national security and classified ink? Next, we look into the heart of one of the most enduring theories. Did MKUltra create assassins who didn't even know they were killers? Let's continue. Erased and rewired. Could minds be turned into weapons? You know their names: Lee Harvey Oswald, Sirhan, Ted Kaczynski, but what if you never really knew who they were? Lone wolves, madmen, killers. But what if they weren't acting alone, or even consciously? This is where the MKUltra conspiracy stretches into one of its darkest and most persistent questions. Did Project MKUltra create real-life silent assassins? People conditioned for extreme actions. And forget, the theory isn't new. In the early days of the Cold War, the idea of brainwashed assassins seemed like science fiction. But inside CIA offices, it was a very real obsession. The question wasn't whether it could be done, it was how. Could a human being be broken down, split internally, and rebuilt to obey orders with no memory of them? Could you embed a second self, a sleeping mind, beneath the conscious one? A mind that could be triggered by a word, a sound, a phrase. According to surviving records from MKUltra, these weren't abstract questions. They were tested. Hypnosis was used alongside high doses of LSD and sensory deprivation to induce amnesia and suggestibility. One CIA document outlined experiments where subjects were placed in a trance and made to carry out tasks with no recollection afterward, including rehearsed aggressive scenarios. In one sub-project, subjects reported being unable to remember their names or families for hours after a session. Another document detailed efforts to create a mechanism for the induction of operational amnesia. In plainer terms, how to make someone forget what they were told to do after they did it. It was around this time that stories about Sirhan, the man who assassinated Robert F. Kennedy, began to circulate. Sirhan claimed he couldn't remember the shooting, that he felt like he was under a trance. The notebook found in his home, filled with repetitive phrases like RFK must die. Some researchers believe it wasn't simply madness, it was conditioning. The Project MKUltra real story connects here not just through theory, but through strange overlaps. Sirhan was treated by psychologists linked to government-funded research. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, participated in brutal psychological studies at Harvard at age 16, under a professor later tied to CIA-backed behavioral research. None of this proves these men were programmed, but it's enough to ask, where is the line between madness and manipulation? And if such programming worked even once, just once, how many others walked away unaware of what they'd done? The CIA denies it. The official line remains that MKUltra was about drug interrogation techniques, not mind control murderers. But many documents were destroyed, others remain classified, and the people involved? Some disappeared, others died, and some lived long enough to say just enough and no more. Even today, questions linger in courtroom testimonies, in FOIA documents, in whispered interviews with surviving insiders. Not all of it is provable, but the MKUltra truth may be stranger than any conspiracy. If this sounds like a movie plot, it is. The Manchurian Candidate was released in 1962, but the files suggest the reality was already in motion before the cameras rolled. The deeper we dig, the more it becomes clear MKUltra wasn't just about breaking minds. It was about rebuilding them into something else. Up next, the story of a man who helped build the program, then tried to walk away, and what happened when he did. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, take a moment. These aren't just stories. They're scars, left on real people, hidden in files that were never meant to be found. If this unsettles you the way it unsettles me, then you understand why we make these videos. Not for shock, not for clicks, but because history, when left in the dark, doesn't stay dead. It spreads. If you want to help bring light to what was meant to stay buried, subscribe, like this video, share it. Let the algorithm know that truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable. This channel is for people who don't look away. Thank you for being one of them. Now let's uncover what happened to the man who tried to walk away from MKUltra and didn't survive the attempt. Let's move to Frank Olson, the scientist who knew too much. The scientist who knew too much and fell. In 1953, a man fell from a 13th floor window of the Statler Hotel in New York City. His name was Frank Olson. He was a bacteriologist, a father, a government scientist, and, according to the official report, it was suicide. But decades later, his family began asking questions, and the answers led straight into the heart of Project MKUltra. Frank Olson wasn't just any scientist. He worked at Fort Detrick, Maryland, America's hub for biological warfare. But what the public didn't know at the time was that Olson had also been pulled into classified CIA operations. He had clearance, he had access, and, it turns out, he had doubts. According to declassified documents, 9 days before his death, Olson attended a CIA retreat. Without his knowledge, he was given a high dose of LSD, part of a MKUltra experiment aimed at studying truth serum and mental destabilization. What followed was a rapid breakdown. He became paranoid, disoriented. He told his wife he wanted to quit his job. He questioned the ethics of his work. He even hinted that he'd seen things that disturbed him. Days later, he was dead. For years, the government insisted it was a tragic accident, a mental breakdown, nothing more. But then came the leaks, the files, the testimonies, the quiet admissions that, yes, Olson had been drugged by his colleagues, without consent, and that was only the beginning. In the 1990s, Olson's body was exhumed by a forensic pathologist. The result? Signs of blunt force trauma to the head before the fall. Suddenly, the story didn't look like suicide at all. It looked like a silencing. His son, Eric Olson, has spent decades trying to uncover what really happened. He believes his father was murdered because he knew too much about chemical weapons testing, secret interrogations, and the deeper layers of the MKUltra dark history. And he may not be wrong. One internal CIA memo released years later stated, "It was felt that he might talk, that he was a security risk." Another mentioned possible future embarrassment. Chilling words for a dead man with a conscience. The Project MKUltra, real story, isn't just about drugs and hypnosis. It's about what happens when a machine built for secrecy starts to eat its own. Olson's death wasn't the only one. Others died in custody, in psychiatric hospitals, in remote clinics run by covert programs. Some deaths were called overdoses, others were ruled accidents. But a pattern began to emerge. The closer someone got to the truth, the shorter their life expectancy seemed to become. Frank Olson's window wasn't just a literal fall, it was a metaphor for what happens when someone looks too far into the abyss of classified science, for what happens when even the creators of the monster become afraid of it, and for what's still missing. Even now, some files related to Olson remain redacted or classified. The full truth lies in a vault and may never fully surface. But the crack in the window remains. If Olson was silenced, what about the ones who refused to stay quiet? The ones who remembered what was done to them vividly and spoke anyway? How do you tell the truth when everyone calls you insane and the evidence was designed to disappear? Testimonies they tried to bury. What if everything you remembered was a lie? What if your own thoughts felt like they'd been planted there by someone else? That's what survivors of Project MKUltra have claimed for decades. Not in whispers, but in courtrooms, in interviews, on record. But instead of justice, they were met with silence, then disbelief. Meet Linda MacDonald. In 1963, she checked into Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal for mild depression. She left unable to read, write, or remember her husband's name. Her mind had been wiped using a technique known as depatterning, a core part of MKUltra experiments. Doctors gave her 100 days of drug-induced sleep, 102 electroshock sessions, and hours of repeated audio messaging. No consent, no explanation. To this day, she says she's been rebuilding her identity from scratch. Then there's James Thornwell, an Army sergeant interrogated over a missing document. The CIA secretly gave him LSD without warning, then psychologically manipulated him until he cracked. He described the experience as having his mind torn apart, strand by strand. He never fully recovered. Val Orlikow came forward too. Her husband, Leonard, was another patient at Allen Memorial. He never knew his therapy was funded by the CIA. Val testified that Leonard was drugged, isolated, and subjected to bizarre behavioral conditioning, leaving him emotionally broken for years. These aren't isolated tragedies. They form a disturbing pattern that runs across decades, borders, and demographics. From veterans to housewives, Prisoners to university students, the victims of MKUltra dark history, all share one chilling thread. They were used and then discarded, but some didn't stay quiet. In 1984, a group of Canadian victims, Linda, Val, and 7 others, filed a lawsuit against the CIA. They weren't just suing for damages. They were demanding answers, demanding proof. They wanted someone to admit what had been done to them. What did the CIA do? They settled quietly, financial compensation with non-disclosure agreements, no public trial, no admission of guilt. The message was clear: the truth had a price, and they were willing to pay it to make it go away. But not everyone could be bought, and not all the evidence was buried. Here's where the trail gets strange. Some survivors describe eerie consistencies. The same hypnotic phrases, the same trigger words, the same handlers with code names instead of identities. One man claimed he had recurring dreams of being placed in a chair under a light, hearing a voice say, "You will forget now." He didn't know what MKUltra was until decades later, when he read a declassified document and saw that exact phrase listed as part of a memory suppression protocol. Are these coincidences or fragments of something larger? And if some were programmed to forget, how many others still haven't remembered? That's the core horror of Project MKUltra Real Story. It didn't just destroy minds. It made people doubt themselves forever. It severed memory from identity. And once that's broken, how do you prove anything? How do you reclaim your life when even your thoughts feel like someone else's experiment? What makes these testimonies powerful isn't just what they describe, it's what they imply. That what was MKUltra may still be with us, not as a project, but as a blueprint. An idea, a system of control that learned to hide better. Next, we examine the proof they couldn't bury, the receipts, contracts, and documents that survived the CIA's purge. Because for all the denial, there were some files they couldn't burn. What they couldn't burn, files from the ashes. In 1973, as the Watergate scandal threatened to bring down the Nixon administration, CIA Director Richard Helms gave a quiet order: destroy everything. Thousands of pages related to Project MKUltra were shredded, burned, or locked behind vault doors. Sub-project logs, payment receipts, interrogation protocols, gone. But someone made a mistake. In 1977, a Freedom of Information request unearthed 7 boxes of overlooked documents, about 20,000 pages, misfiled in the CIA's budget archives. These weren't theories. They were invoices, contracts, lab reports, paper trails with names, dates, locations. Suddenly, MKUltra truth had physical evidence, and it was far worse than anyone had imagined. One document detailed a $10,000 payment to magician and hypnotist Dr. Milton Erickson, contracted to study how suggestion could influence memory loss. Another showed payments to the American Psychological Association, funneled through front organizations to maintain plausible deniability. But perhaps most damning, a 1955 memo titled Outline of Research Techniques. It listed electroshock, polygraph enhancement, sleep deprivation, radio wave manipulation, truth serums, and subconscious suggestion, all categorized under behavioral control. There were 149 officially listed sub-projects. Some of the most disturbing include Sub-Project 8, contracted to Stanford University, testing LSD on students under the guise of personality research. Sub-Project 68, run by Dr. Ewan Cameron at the Allen Memorial Institute, linked to deep sleep therapy and psychic driving. Sub-Project 130, focused on controlling behavior through electromagnetic fields and radio frequencies. The paper trail didn't stop at doctors and universities. CIA funding also reached corporations. Eli Lilly and Company was contracted to manufacture large quantities of LSD. Why? The CIA needed a stable domestic supply after Switzerland, where the drug was first discovered by Albert Hofmann in 1943, tightened export restrictions. But the most unsettling entries aren't the big names. They're the small ones. Unknown prisoners at Lexington Narcotics Hospital in Kentucky were paid with extra methadone doses to be test subjects. Homeless people in New York were brought to safe houses and given LSD without consent, then observed through two-way mirrors. One operative, George Hunter White, wrote proudly, "Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" That's not conspiracy. That's a direct quote from a man who ran MKUltra experiments on US soil. And here's the open wound. These are just the documents that survived. How many others were erased? What's still sealed in classified archives? And what projects were never filed at all? Off-book, black-budget operations, invisible by design. When former CIA Director William Colby was asked about MKUltra dark history, he paused. Then he said, "We had to do what was necessary to protect the country." When pressed further, he added only, "Some things are better left unsaid." Some researchers believe Project MKUltra real story only scratched the surface, that MKUltra was the prototype and its principles live on in different forms, different agencies, under different names. So now we ask, if they needed to destroy the files, what were they really hiding? In the next chapter, we follow that question forward into the digital age, algorithms instead of LSD, surveillance instead of hypnosis. Has the mission changed, or just the methods? Let's look at the ghost project that never really ended. The Ghost Project, MKUltra's legacy today. MKUltra officially ended in 1973. But if you believe that, you're not alone, and you might be wrong. The documents were shredded, the testimonies buried, the programs renamed. But the principles, the goal of influencing thought, controlling behavior, weaponizing psychology, that never went away. Today, behavioral science isn't confined to secret labs. It's embedded in your phone, your news feed, your targeted ads. Psychographics, biometric surveillance, algorithmic nudging, all methods of shaping what you see, feel, and choose. The ghost of Project MKUltra isn't haunting us. It's been reborn, dressed in code, driven by data. In 2018, whistleblowers from Cambridge Analytica revealed how Facebook user data was harvested and used to influence political decisions through emotional manipulation. Millions of people unknowingly profiled and nudged, not unlike the covert behavior shaping once tested with LSD and hypnosis. Same goal, different delivery system. In 2014, leaked documents from GCHQ, Britain's equivalent of the NSA, exposed a program called JTRIG. Its mission: discredit, disrupt, and deceive online targets using psychological tactics. Internal presentations read like echoes from the MKUltra dark history playbook, inducing paranoia, exploiting fear, manipulating belief systems. But this time, the subjects were not in padded rooms. They were in their living rooms, scrolling. Even the language persists. One internal Pentagon research project unearthed in 2021 openly described exploring narrative control technologies through social media. Another explored predictive human behavior models using brain scans, eye movement, and voice stress. The surveillance state didn't stop at watching us. It wants to understand what moves us, so it can move us. So the question becomes, what was MKUltra really about? Was it ever just about interrogations and Cold War paranoia? Or was it an early prototype, a testbed for something far more scalable? Today, behavioral economists talk about choice architecture. Tech giants speak of engagement optimization. Intelligence communities invest in cognitive warfare. But all of it leads to the same uncomfortable thought. If you can predict a person's choices and shape their environment, do you still need to control their mind, or have you already done it? And if MKUltra truth was buried once to protect national security, who's watching what gets buried now? The final documents from the CIA's mind control era remain partially classified. Others may never surface, but their methods, trauma, repetition, suggestion, control, have evolved. They no longer require drugs or electrodes. They require access, and we've already given it. In our final chapter, we confront the hardest truth of all, not that Project MKUltra real story was real, but that we're still living inside its long, flickering shadow. The experiment may have never ended. Let's conclude. The experiment never ended. What if the most disturbing part of Project MKUltra isn't what it did, but what it revealed? That the mind can be broken, that memories can be rewritten, that truth itself can be engineered and erased. In the end, MKUltra truth isn't about tinfoil theories or shadowy rooms. It's about something much simpler and much darker. It's about how little it takes to dismantle a human being. Frank Olson fell from a window. Linda McDonald lost her identity. James Thornwell never recovered. Hundreds of others were never even named, just referred to as subjects, cases, expendables. Their suffering was footnoted, redacted, forgotten. And yet their voices still echo, because what was MKUltra wasn't just a secret CIA project. It was a revelation about the fragility of consciousness itself, a test of how easily loyalty, memory, even selfhood could be dissolved when trust is weaponized and science is untethered from ethics. That question didn't end in 1973. It evolved. Today, your attention is tracked, your preferences predicted, your fears modeled and monetized. You're not strapped to a hospital bed or slipped LSD in a drink, but you're being studied, measured, nudged, designed for. So ask yourself, if MKUltra experiments once relied on chemical coercion, how far more effective is digital consent? If you hand over your data willingly, does it make the control more ethical or more complete? This isn't about paranoia, it's about patterns. Because every time someone says that could never happen, history whispers back, it already did, and may still be. That's the lasting legacy of Project MKUltra real story. Not the experiments themselves, but the door they opened to state-sponsored manipulation, to institutional betrayal, to a world where the greatest weapon is belief and the battlefield is the mind. The question now isn't whether MKUltra conspiracy was real. The question is, how would you even know if it never ended? And now that you've seen what they tried to erase, tell us, what do you think they're still hiding? And if you think this is the darkest chapter hidden behind government seals, wait until you hear what happened deep in the frozen Ural Mountains. 9 experienced hikers vanished under impossible circumstances. Their tent ripped open from the inside. Bodies scattered, some with crushed ribs, others without tongues, officially unexplained. But like MKUltra, the Dyatlov Pass incident leaves us asking, what don't we know, and what were we never meant to? If you're ready to explore another mystery where truth dissolves into silence, watch our Dyatlov Pass documentary next. It's a descent into paranoia, secrecy, and the chilling cost of unanswered questions. Good night.